One of the best ways to get ready to run for office is to identify your true motivations for doing so. Sometimes I meet with political candidates. I say, hey, why are you running for office? They think it'd be cool. They really want to do something. They really want to participate in our government. But at their core, there's a reason that you're running. I frequently have people tell me that Republicans run to stop something and Democrats run to do something. And I think that makes a lot of sense given the differences between the left and the right. We're going to go over a few questions you need to ask yourself to clarify your positions and get yourself ready for the next phase of the campaign. The first question we want to ask is, what are you passionate about? Is it agricultural issues? Are they energy issues? These are questions you want to answer because they'll help guide the policy and the focus of your messaging once you get started on the campaign. It helps you to identify where to go to get support, which communities you want to meet with first, and so on. Once your polling data comes in and you've identified the issues that are important to the community, you can incorporate that into the campaign. But what you're passionate about is going to be the central driving force for most of your conversations and what you do. The next thing you need to do is ask yourself, what are your core values and beliefs? Are you more in line with Ayn Rand or Rand Paul or maybe Karl Marx, right? You need to identify exactly where you are because this helps to go with your passion. You need to be able to identify what your limits are. How far will you not go in order to get support? When you're sitting across from that energy company and they say, sure, we can cut down this rainforest to drill for more oil, is that something that's going to bother you, right? You need to know what your limits are. And so identifying your core values and your core beliefs are vital at this step. A lot of groups, a lot of special interest groups, a lot of lobbying groups, a lot of political groups, you're going to be able to work with over the course of the campaign, and you need to make sure you know that they're groups that you are ideologically in line with. What unique perspectives do you bring to office? What separates you from your opponents in the primary, and why should anybody vote for you for anything? It's important for you to identify what makes you unique in the election, what gives you any kind of authority, from what directions you come from, and what approaches do you take to things. Everything that you've done in the course of your life leads up to this very moment. You've got to qualify everything that you've done and illustrate how it helps make you ready to run for public office. This also is an opportunity that will later help you distinguish yourself from your opponents, because your business experience or your experience with homeschool groups, for example, may be very important depending on the race that you're running for. And it also helps to distinguish between you and your opponents in really important ways that'll be very, very valuable to the electorate once we get to phase 3 of the political campaign, which would be the compare and contrast. So these are things that you really want to identify. And if you don't have a lot of life experience, or if you haven't raised a lot of kids, or if you haven't run a business, don't let these things get in your way. It's important to identify the things that you have done. But the door may have been small, but if you step through it deeply, you will have a lot to offer. What are your long-term goals? I meet plenty of political candidates who often want to do more than the office they're running for. Sometimes they want to run for governor, sometimes they want to be in the Senate, and so forth. So you want to be honest with yourself about your goals. There's a tendency for people to be humble sometimes and not say, I want to be president, right? That's a common answer I hear from people. Obviously, that's not going to be realistic because of changing political ends. There's a lot of reasons why that's not realistic for most people, but it's not necessarily the title that matters. It's what you can do. And there's plenty of really powerful senators and lobbyists and other people who are able to achieve these things without sitting in the Oval Office. So being able to clearly identify what your long-term goal is really important. And the conclusion may not be running for public office, because there's lots of ways to create political change and to make a revolution in any particular sector. That doesn't necessarily mean running for office. You want to ask who your role models are in politics. What people have done something that you admire, that you would like to emulate, or whose strategy you hope to apply to your unique goals. Being able to clearly identify a few of these people who you look up to and who you look at to help guide your campaign are going to be important for helping to develop the approach you take later. And I would go so far as to write this down, have a real conversation with yourself about which leaders you admire, what they accomplished that you'd like to emulate, and what you can hope accomplish or continue that they started. We really need somebody right now to continue what Reagan did, to continue what Kennedy did in bringing people together. And there's a huge gap in that in politics right now. So that would be my motivation for trying to get you elected, for example. The next thing you need to do is identify how you're going to serve the people who elect you. This is not a question most people ask, and it's a huge problem because constituent services are terrible for most congressional districts and for most people. There's a really good chance that the Democrat will win in Ohio again, not necessarily because his ideas are better, but because everybody knows if they call his office and they need help, he will respond. That was not true of the former Republican senator. I don't know if it's true now of the new one. Constituent services is very, very important. It'll make and win an election in a state, and it will, which has an effect on the entire country. So when these guys get elected, especially Republicans who are kind of known for this, when you get elected and you don't respond to your constituents, it's going to cause problems later on, and these problems can affect the entire country. So you need to have a strategy to clearly identify how you're going to stay connected to the community, how you're going to respond to them. Cory Booker, for example, had a series of town hall meetings all across New Jersey. And he met with voters, he stayed in touch with them. It was really great. And I think he set a good example for approaches that can be taken to stay in touch with the community. For example, MPs in England, they have constituent time, and they'll go sit at a desk in their districts, and they'll just wait for the community to come and talk to them. And they keep regular hours so that they can do that. And so they engage with their people directly. And there's something to be learned from that, because I've not had a lot of state legislators that I don't think I've ever seen a state legislator do that. I think in Virginia, they've got district offices. They do a pretty good job of that in Virginia, I should say. And so you need to think about how you're going to do that based on the office that you're going to be in and what you can do to stay connected to the community. You need to identify your strengths and your weaknesses. And I think this is kind of the hardest part, because we tend to think of ourselves as not having any weaknesses. But since you're not as awesome as me, obviously you have a few. So you want to identify what these are. Is it a lack of patience? Is it you'll eat anything anybody puts in front of you? That can be a huge problem on the campaign, because I assure you, grandmas are offering you candies and cookies like 50 times a day. You will get so fat. All this fat has come from campaign work, by the way. So anyway, you want to identify your strengths and your weaknesses and be really honest. Talk to your spouses, talk to your friends, and see how you can improve yourself as a leader, as a communicator. Balancing your personal life and your work life is something you've probably already achieved by now. But when you are in public office, depending on the office, there's a lot more pressure because it takes a lot of time. So people wonder usually why does it take so much time? That's an important question. Because most evenings you have to continue to spend time with political people, whether it be in your community, whether it be at other events where you need to network with other political people. There's always something going on. And how busy you are is a reflection of where you are. I think the average congressman has to raise, I think it's $10,000 to $15,000 per week the entire time they're elected. So you can imagine, you go to the legislature all day, then you spend all evening on the phone raising money every single day. They even have special call centers just for the congressman to go in order to do this. You want to clearly identify what your expectations for the role are. This includes going and meeting with public officials who have served in that position before. You want to have an understanding of it in depth. One, to help you identify your time so that you have realistic expectations for the role you're about to take. This will also help you better prepare for it. Once you've identified your expectations for the role, you then campaign on those expectations as well. Biden, for example, set the expectations for his role by saying that he was going to be ready on day one. That's a stark contrast to Trump, who was not ready on day one and had a series of firing and staff shakeups and drama in the White House that was really unsettling. And he wanted to restore the confidence in having a stable executive, and that was almost his entire campaign. No more shit show. He probably should have just campaigned on that directly. It's like, no more shit show. The guy that's the chief of staff will be the chief of staff through the entire administration. Everybody who starts off on day one will stay there, and they will be there at the end of 4 years. That was a great campaign message. You see, Ronald Reagan did something similar. It's morning again in America. No more screw ups. No more waiting in line for gas. No more hostages being taken because we're heroes and we'll take care of that. And so that was important. Reagan set the expectations. Then he illustrated how he would set those expectations. Here's my experience. Here's what I believe in. Here's what I've done, and so forth. And so you will need to do the same thing on your political campaign. You'll have to set the expectations, illustrate how you're going to meet those expectations, and of course you'll internalize those expectations so you'll have a realistic view of what the office should look like. Then you'll have to ask how you measure success. An example I really like is, I'm going to build a wall, right? Of course that expectation wasn't met. Despite that, the expectation was set. We're going to build a wall. A measure of success would have been having the wall built. Now, it wasn't built, so he didn't meet the expectation, but you can imagine how great it would have been if that expectation had been met. Being able to identify what victory looks like beyond just expectations, but what does it look like when we succeed? And you have to paint the picture. Imagine you wake up in the morning, right? You paint the picture. It's part of the picture that you paint, not just for yourself so you can put together your campaign message, but also so that you can illustrate to the voters what you will have accomplished by the end of the term. And this is very, very important. You need it for you and you need it for them. So here's some more things to think about as you're getting for step 2 is identifying your core passion, the things that make you tick. Reach deep down inside yourself, answer some of these questions, and then you'll be ready for step 3.